Good afternoon now. Welcome to JTA. This is the interview for the P-19-027 UTC Corridor Transit-Oriented Development Project. My name is John Burdine. I'm a contracts and procurement specialist with JTA. So we have here to interview Jones Lang LaSalle Americas Inc. and their team. This is going to be an interview format, so we're intending this to be kind of an open dialogue. We can ask questions, you can ask questions. We'll just kind of go back and forth. We have 2 hours. Before we get started, we do have emergency exits out this door. There's one immediately to your right and then one on the other side of the elevators. We have women's restrooms on this side, men's on the other side, as well as water fountain if you need it. And then if we had to go out the back door, emergency exit, we can go out that way and then towards the back of the building to the stairwell. The safety message for the month is when you gamble with safety, you bet your life. Or use my cheat sheet there. It's brand new, only 2 days. So, all right, are we good? If we're ready, we'll just go ahead and start it. Start it out. Oh yeah, introduction. Sorry, thank you. Again, my name is John Burdine, contracts and procurement specialist. And then,
my name is Carolyn Allen Smith, contracts and procurement specialist.
Kendra Burton, manager of financial planning analysis.
Zan Traversos, planning and system development, planning side of TOD.
Alicia Batson, senior manager in the public affairs.
Cleveland Ferguson, CAO.
Richard Clark, Capital Resource Officer.
And Andre Wallace, President of Jack USA Partnership.
Brian Smith, JLL.
April Backus, ETM.
Ray Spofford, ETM.
Tina Strickland, the Strickland Group.
Meryl Leotter with City Venture Associates.
Michael Tabb, Red Rock Global.
Jeremy Becker with JLL.
Emily Crutcher with JLL.
Tyrone Rochelle with Red Rock Global.
Michael Lofton, JLL Jacksonville office.
all right, great, thank you so much. So we'll go with the time as 12:05, and we got 2 hours. And I'll open it up to the committee and you guys. Sorry.
Okay. Okay, yeah. Wasn't sure who you wanted to start. Yeah.
And John, may I pass these out now?
Sure, absolutely.
So as Emily starts to pass out, just I'll placemat for you guys. First of all, thank you for having us. It's a pleasure to be here. We have been, I would say, keeping tabs on TOD in Jacksonville for quite some time, JTA specifically. And I know credit to your organization for being, I think, forward-thinking enough to look into how TOD can enhance your city and can also enhance your ridership and enhance your transit system. It is not necessarily a common thing for cities to do. Usually it's more reactionary than proactive. We've been around a lot of these things, so we certainly know both sides of the coin. So with that, as you can see, we have a very large, numerous team here. And I think part of what sets us apart from a lot of other teams is both our local expertise and our local presence. You couple that with our national and really international expertise in transit-oriented development. This is a team that candidly is built to help transit systems figure out TOD from a lot of different angles. And we know because we've done it before. Almost everybody up here has done TOD planning or implementation in one way, shape, or form. And as John said earlier, we want this to be a conversation. You certainly you sent us a list of 7 questions to address. Some of them were fairly meaty, so we certainly anticipate those are our conversation questions. One thing that I think sets us apart and makes JLL a little bit different is if you look down at your placemat and just see A, who we've represented and who we work with, and then B, this we'll call it a little bubble wheel in the middle represents the spectrum not just of what we can do, but what we've done with different transit systems all around the country and all around the world. Literally to the extent we do transaction management, lease administration, all the way, to project management for new builds and renovation. This team and our firms have done basically any and all of those aspects. We have some more, or at least some enhanced information about representative clients on the back of your sheet. But as I said, we are thrilled to be here because as a team, we know we are solutions-oriented engine, really, that is a great fit for what we believe JTA is looking to do. So the first question you asked us was, oh, that's right. Before we get into the first question, one of the things that we've thought about, and we've thought about kind of in depth, is how JTA really is on the cutting edge of really transport, right? Transportation. You guys are looking at different types of systems than most other cities in the country, and whether and how you guys are really ripe for TOD. And one of our teammates, Marilee Utter, has been, she was kind of integral and really instrumental in Denver. And I know Marilee, again, we all have a ton of experience at TOD, but Marilee, I know that we wanted to address certain things relative to ripeness.
So a lot of my work around the country is people saying, will a TOD work here? Look at this site, can I get a TOD here? And I've developed kind of an acid test that works to help you get a quick read on, is it feasible? It also is a diagnosis for what you need to do to really have successful development around transit, because really it's about development more than it is about the transit. The first thing you need is a vision. Does the community know what they want to see there? Entitlements are so important, community buy-in. Individual character of each station is so different. So is it going to be residential? Is it going to be mixed use with residential, mixed use with commercial, high-rise? Do they have a vision for what they want and what they will support? Ideally, that vision comes with zoning. But even if the zoning's not in place, having a broad community outreach is really important. Secondly, is there a market to support that vision? If they want Nordstrom's and you've got Dollar Store, it's not going to work. So obviously the market thinking and knowledge has to be brought to that visioning process so people don't get off on the wrong track, get wrong expectations. But if you've got a vision and you've got a market that supports that vision, it's feasible and realistic. The third thing is, do you have the land? Because you can't do development if you don't have control of land. And that's often the hardest part, actually, is getting control of land. The fourth thing is leadership. And the leadership needs to be public, private, not-for-profit, all pulling together. This team was strategically put together. It's big, but it's a big job. And this team was put together because we think that we can help you with all four of those. First of all, the visioning. We've got experts on visioning. Secondly, market. We have people locally, nationally. We know the market. We know how it works. Third, the land. What's going on in the market, securing the land, securing tenants. And fourth, leadership. JTA working with Downtown Development Agency and the city provides the leadership. If you have those four things, money, financing, all that stuff falls into place. But you've got to have that leadership. And we think we're really proud of you for the leadership you're showing with your transit initiatives. And we'd really like to support you in helping on the development around those transit stations.
Okay, so getting into the outline of the questions that you all sent us. Obviously, we're going to start with team approach. As is not a secret, there are a lot of people in front of you. We have a big team. But as Marilee, I think, correctly said, this is a big job. And it also, we believe, requires various expertise, not just locally, but from experience around the country. Obviously, as you can see, this is the JLL team. That's how we're structured. Again, I'm Jeremy Becker. I'm your project manager, for lack of a better term. I am your throat to choke. That being said, on a national level, as you can see, we've got the JLL team here, Emily, Brian. We have local JLL market knowledge. We have Red Rock Global, who again has done almost as many national projects as all of us, candidly. Michael and Ty, both of whom have significant expertise in various facets of what will be required for this endeavor. And then on the local level, which I think is very important, we have market knowledge and we have planning. And you couple that also with, I'm sorry, and I didn't mean to leave Marilee out, but Marilee, who's got, I mean, honestly, probably more TOD experience than almost anybody in this field from around the country, but specifically as it relates to, well, various cities, but Denver is home. So, this is a very unique national blend of expertise, coupled with, again, with your local design and your local engineering, which candidly means that your local people know where the bodies are buried with a lot of the infrastructure and what you'll need. And I would probably say unparalleled local market knowledge of JLL locally. We are an extremely collaborative firm, so we work with our local markets all the time. So I'm based in Atlanta. That doesn't mean we can't be here on about a day's notice, usually, sometimes less. And your out-of-town contingent here, we're people who fly in regularly. We service clients literally all around the country. So from a management model, again, if you need us in an hour, you've got the local presence, whether it's the JLL local presence, whether it's the planning local presence, whether it's the community engagement local presence with Tina, who I unintentionally just forgot to mention. And the local community engagement piece is also extremely important, because I don't care what you say, if you don't have somebody local engaging in your community who knows it, it's just, usually outsiders don't do well dropping in unless they have local expertise and local assistance. So what I would tell you, and candidly what I believe, is that this team is set up extraordinarily well, both locally and nationally. We have that national background, but we've also got the local expertise to make it work. Our expectation, candidly, again, I am your throat to choke on this project. I'm the guy who handles everything and filters it down. That being said, given the scope, what we believe is the length and the size of this project, we firmly believe that you will be engaging with our local team as well on a fairly regular basis.
And so I'll be supporting Jeremy, as will the rest of the team, and Emily Crutcher. And so over the 24-month project duration that you all have outlined, we've put together a project schedule as part of our proposal. And those were general times that we think it might take to do the tasks that you all have outlined. And certainly based on your feedback, your requirements for deadlines or hurdles, we would be pleased to revise or update that schedule. But from our perspective, any project approach starts with project management and oversight. So in terms of the frequency of approach, we expect to be meeting with you all bi-weekly, monthly, whatever cadence feels best for you all. That could be a meeting, a mixture of in-person meetings, WebExes, video conferencing. One of your questions to us was about integration of innovation into our project approach, and so we're going to share some of those tools with you guys today that we'll bring to the table. In terms of reporting, I know as a public transit agency, being able to show progress is very important. So we'll be providing monthly status updates for you all. We've done that with other clients. Even for the Chicago Transit Authority, we provide annual reports for them that they're able to attach to their website. And we can share that resource with you. So we know that the public perception is really important with this project. So that's our project management approach. As it pertains to community engagement, that we also anticipate that being across the duration of the 24 months. And Tina's going to speak to the community engagement piece that she's going to lead later, but certainly working with you all to identify the right stakeholder groups is going to be critical. And so we'll look to you all to finalize that outreach plan and that meeting schedule. And so that's the overall framework for our approach. We want to be an extension of your team. We want to be helpful. We want to make sure that our insights and our strategy are ultimately implementable, because we want to help you all increase ridership. We want to help you all capture land value. We want to help ensure that the future of not just the JTA, but Jacksonville and Duval County, the growth is centered around the transit stations. So we hope we've answered the question, and we would welcome any follow-on questions that y'all might have for that. Okay.
All right, now we get into the meat and the fun part. How's that? Okay. This to us, obviously, the real estate questions, the expertise questions are a lot more fun than showing you an org chart. So the first question that you asked us to address really deals with La Villa townhomes, implementation of the strategic plan around La Villa, and kind of our thoughts on that. I think from at least an initial perspective, we think La Villa is a pretty unique area. We like it. We like the fact that you guys, the city as a whole, constructed a plan and moved into its implementation. Looking at the history and the character of the neighborhood, one of the things that we have found in TOD is that when you're looking to help work with an entire transit system on TOD, one of the understandings you need going in is that every station is different, every neighborhood is different. And building TOD around the fabric of the neighborhood usually is more successful than trying to stick something that doesn't work. And then you kind of couple that with the execution of the plan and really delving deep into what is the vision of not just the transit authority stakeholder, but other stakeholders in the city. It's a pretty, I would say, comprehensive way to manage the process. Sorry, we're having some technical difficulties. Right. Okay, so the first piece, or the piece around La Villa, was about townhomes and how that affects transit-oriented ridership and development, and our thoughts on that. So I'll probably turn to Michael on that one and get it moving.
Our firm, Red Rock, we were fortunate enough to work here probably close to 5 years ago on the downtown, for the DIA, on the downtown feasibility study. And we primarily looked at the North Bank, and then we came probably a year and a half later and worked on the South Bank TAP with ULI. And so we have a very good perspective on both the North and the South Bank and the communities. This is very much like Atlanta. This is a city of fabulous communities. They have their own character, their own history, in many cases their own architecture. La Villa was one that then and now was probably had some of the richest history, but because it was not as developed, it was really a desire to get back and to respect and see it come back and be rebuilt to its history. So under the DIA, when Mr. Wallace was there, we were able to factor that into an overall strategy that it looks like the first phase of that that's being executed upon is this townhouse development. Many people have all types of different ideas about the appropriateness of TOD-based densities and development. The question we read kind of implied some of that. But the reality is, if you look at the historic character of that neighborhood and its density and its scale, this first step is really an appropriate first step, very feasible, executable step, and beginning to see all types of both cultural and community development come off of it. You have some anchor locations within the La Villa community that will also be potentially the recipient of the development, the convention center and areas around there. But this is very interesting because La Villa is a good example of how the conversations with each one of your nodes or potential nodes is going to create its own set of requests and demands and needs to respect either the architectural history, the architectural character, or the constraints to actual vertical development, or the actual community sensitivities. So whatever you walk in with on each one of those areas, the community is going to give you some feedback. And you're going to constantly be looking at the need to balance whether or not we can go this way or that way. If you're not armed with real market feasibility, meaning you come in there knowing from a pure real estate brokerage financing, development outreach perspective. What can be accomplished? You run the risk of doing things like we did at Fort McPherson in Atlanta, where we asked the community said we want Whole Foods, a biotech research facility, all types of things. The plans were all drawn, signed into legislation, and 6 years later, they can't get the first one done because it just wasn't economically and market feasible. So while you don't want to dictate anything, you want to have a sense from your team as to what your visions, what your innovations want, how they can manifest themselves as actual feasible, executable development. And then you need a group, and this is, we asked Tina to work with us on this because of her depth. I'm going to let her explain her involvement in community outreach, but we then need a group that's very sensitive and thoughtful in how they approach what is somewhat desired, feasible, with getting community input, community guidance, and to developing a real executable plan. La Villa is a perfect example of that because there's going to be a lot of new development, and the community clearly has had a great sense of its own desires and what it wants to see. Do you want to talk a little bit about community?
Well, sure. I've had the pleasure of working with JTA and JEA in the past in community outreach in different facets and areas. Mostly it was for road widening or overhead to underground in sensitive areas where people didn't want to release the property or other situations. Also in South Florida, Bartow, and in town of Jupiter. And the thing is, you want to give information to the public. You want to have an arena, whether it's a church establishment, the churches are also very important, or whether it's a community hall, get people together, give them the information, don't push it down the throat, give them the information, questions and answers. You want them to engage, you want them to be part of it. And go back and work on a few things you're able to tweak or work on a few things. Compile that data in a form that we could give back to you. But all of this is in conjunction with your practices and policies that you've been effective over the years, and expand on that. And it may be in phases, but over time, get those systems stronger and better. And that's the goal.
And one thing I wanted to add on to what Michael was saying is there has been a national trend for multifamily development on primary, secondary, tertiary markets. Jacksonville has followed suit. If you look at the residential development that we've had in our Oregon core recently, it's been multifamily. We've had the workforce housing through VestCorp with Loss at Monroe, LaVilla, and Jefferson Station that's about to deliver. And then also the market rate housing, the 200 Riverside going up now, 220 Riverside, and everything going on around there. So we actually feel that having the townhome development adjacent to the station is actually a good barometer of being able to continue the resurgence and the redevelopment of the La Villa area after this multifamily cycle ends that we have seen. So instead of just having all of our new development being residential multifamily, Houston Street Manor that's active senior, as well as the Loss of La Villa, we also have a secondary offering in this area of townhomes for people that want to own fee simple their own properties, build equity and invest that way. And with that diversity of residential offerings in the area, we think that will also help spur other types of investment, showing that this is a long-term evolving area that is diverse to new happenings outside of just multi-residential.
The introduction of townhouses, very wise in the sense that you can think of it as you have introduced a number of additional vested stakeholders to that community. These are not young 20, 25-year-olds that are popping in and out, going to work bar. These are people who live there, who come out and they actually care what it looks like around them, cares what gets built the next block over. And so when you're sitting there trying to, in the sense of La Villa, build up a community, not just reposition retail, reposition density in existing areas, but to build something that you already have expressed an interest in and respect in history, you need lots of people to join in with you. They have a stronger vested interest, typically, than transient residents, renters.
And the other piece, and again, I think, in my experience, our main focus, candidly, as a group, the group that we work in with the JLL is working with public sector, right? So we work in various aspects of the public sector. And what I can tell you is almost a hard and fast rule is that when a government says we are going to invest in an area and we are going to help either close a financing gap or give incentives, basically do what needs to be done in order to show that this is an area we care about, we created a plan that we want to implement, the private sector follows. I work or potentially work with a lot of clients who tell me, we'd really like this, and is in no way, shape, or form feasible. Fine, that may or may not work. However, if it's not feasible, or it's tough, or being the first mover in is a big leap, government stepping in and actually playing a part in that changes the equation. And we know that that's part of what happened here. But the other part to I think realize is in La Villa and executing on this plan, whatever we can do, and it may start with a trickle, but it'll snowball, to bring residents there, to bring people next to the station, to continue to build a presence around there, that's something that A, continues to get larger, and B, starts to travel. It starts to travel to different stations. So, and again, in keeping with the kind of historic characteristics of a neighborhood, I think it's a pretty good way to get moving. And I also think it's a really nice way to signal to the development community that this is an important project.
So right now, Brian on the screen, he is showing you all a JLL tool that we have called Blackbird, and it's a GIS, bespoke GIS platform that's based on Google Earth. And Brian and Michael Lofton are going to talk you through some of the layers of data that we have added to the La Villa neighborhood and how it's formed some of our initial thinking around this question that you all have posed to us.
So the first thing you see up here, these aqua parcels show the actual location of the planned proposed townhomes. If we go to these, this gives us the opportunity to look at walk times that surround the stations. So red, 15 minutes, yellow, 10 minutes, green, 5 minutes. And this applies to the entire existing route that you see here. Some other things that we have the ability to look at, notable developments. If I click on each of these, see some information about what's going on in the area, the type of development, the status of the development, what exactly is occurring there, townhomes, obviously, and then some of the multifamily that Michael mentioned. In addition, we can really import any GIS layer into this that we would need. For example, we wanted to look at opportunity zones. So which sites sit in opportunity zones, which sites are adjacent to opportunity zones, for example, the proposed East San Marco station down here, and how could that potentially affect development feasibility?
Let me just say something on opportunity zones when you think of it. If you have a group that's focused in on how do you move you to execution, one of the keys is understanding, along with feasibility, understanding how you could potentially finance so these deals don't get stalled due to lack of financing. So knowing data like this very quickly, clearly, as it compares to the layer of what you're intending to do, allows you to target your discussions and outreach for capital, for development partners. You can think about what someone's doing adjacent to you as a natural partner or competitor to what you're trying to do internally. That type of thing allows you to steer your efforts in a very kind of execution-oriented way, as opposed to just the creativity and visioning and planning of the attractiveness of stations and routes and having them look beautiful and having them be laid out wonderfully, but then everybody around you is competing you already underway, already under construction, and now you can't afford to buy the land because everything is priced up so high, you've based something that's not feasible.
Yeah, this is a very important tool that we use for our clients to develop our kind of targeted strategies for initiatives that work for them. By way of example, do you all mind if I approach TV? Can you turn on the walk time layer? So talking about the private-public partnership that Michael was referring to, if you zoom in a little bit, Brian, you can see the multifamily development that's gone up recently, right here with Vescors, obviously all within the 5-minute walk range. This is just outside, that's probably 6 minutes. these are the kind of things that we can approach other developers who are actively looking to be in the area and saying, these are ways that you can utilize JTA's infrastructure to further advance your offering that you have. And these are the kind of layers, just by way of example, that we use when we approach some of these people in these public-private initiatives.
Retailers as
All
well.
green is because you have multiple targets, because I know that's not 5 minutes.
It's green from any transit.
Any
Right.
transit.
Correct.
Transit.
It's not specifically the one in the
Not-
village.
okay.
It's just green from transit, period.
But that's a good question. That's a layer that we could add. What is just the La
Right.
Villa time? And that's another layer that we could add on to show to developers that we're targeting specifically.
But
for
just
La
think
Villa.
if you're going to have a very important conversation with a retail group that you're trying to track somewhere, you can very quickly tailor your sales pitch, your marketing strategy, anticipate the hurdles they're going to face as tenants or developers, and come there prepared with, well, this is actually what you don't realize, walkable to these 4 or 5 other developments that are being built. Those are things that, again, that's the key to actually getting things financed and done, because people, ultimately, that's where the projects pause. You go through all the planning, all the design, and then people say, well, how do we convince the money to come here? We can't convince the retailers to come, and it's because they have not looked at this feasibility.
Well, and here we're showing walk times. I think this is a good segue into the next question, question 3, which was about parking and parking requirements. So switching to another mode of transit.
Well, did you guys want to get
Or, yeah,
into
any
La Villa at
questions?
all? Because I know that's a meaty question. And I will tell you, from our standpoint, look, the Villa's it's a great way to get going. It's kind of like an early victory to claim because of the development around the station. And again, I think replicating it properly, i.e., not exactly, but figuring other developments into the character of your neighborhoods, that's a win.
Yeah.
And La Villa it's a really good place to start in a lot of different ways and for a lot of different
I
reasons.
think big picture, what success looks like is a series of villages that are unique destinations. So that people will ride transit to go from one place to the other, and they're not all the same. So some neighborhoods are going to be historic and lower rise, some are going to be urban, some are going to be mixed use, some are going to be entertainment. That's what you want. That's part of your strategy. Otherwise, there's no reason for people to stop there. And big picture, when I started in TOD in the early 90s, we used to say the perfect TOD is you take a 1/4 mile ring around the platform, and that should be owned by the public sector, and we zone it for ultimate density, and it looks like Manhattan sets at the platform, and then it flattens out, and we don't disturb any neighborhoods. And that's what we were talking about. What we've learned is that development is far more incremental. It needs to be much more contextual and be relative density compared to the surrounding neighborhood. So relative density in a single-family neighborhood is very different than relative density in the middle of downtown and in the core. And so we really advocate working with the community, having that vision, respecting their vision, and then building on it over time. And yeah, what is comparative density today may not be comparative density in 30 years, but that'll be a high-level problem that we'll look forward to working with them.
Yeah, exactly.
And the next important discussion on that as well is making sure you provide those clear connections from the town hall project to the station, to the transit station and the surrounding area.
Connectivity is everything. Walkability is everything. Everything.
Okay. So as we get into parking requirements, again, you all were curious about parking requirements, and where we project them and how they're going to look in the future. And I know the ETM folks have dug into that, and we're also going to help you visualize it a little bit with Blackbird.
Yeah. So the parking question is that you have such a large and diverse corridor, so it's going to be context sensitive, for example. If you look at, for example, downtown, recently there was a downtown parking study completed, and a number of recommendations came out. So one of the findings was that there's not a parking shortage downtown. There's actually adequate parking projected over the next 5-year period. What the issue more so is the proximity and accessibility to available parking. The study pointed out, which is a good point, that there was upside down pricing structure. The on-street parking was much cheaper than off-street parking. And that causes a lot of traffic congestion in return, reduces the walkability and pedestrian context of downtown. Other recommendations would be you look at the commuter patterns. You have a lot of commuter traffic in and out of downtown. One area to look at is the Stadium District and providing a shuttle to encourage the parking at the outside in the Stadium District.
I might just generalize about parking at transit stations. I mean, what you see in many communities is the demand for parking is less. I mean, you don't need as much parking. It's very routine in cities where they still require parking minimums, so congratulations on not doing that in your court. But they'll cut the requirement in half, or even less, or they'll get rid of a parking requirement, which is huge because developers all think, the first thing they think about is parking. How much parking, how much does it cost, and then they figure out the development around it. So that's a huge incentive to get development. The reason they can cut the parking so much isn't because the whole region doesn't drive. I mean, I've worked in Phoenix, I've worked in Houston, Denver, lots of sprawl cities. And everybody says, oh no, everybody here drives, you gotta drive. We can't cut the parking. But you can because people self-select. People wanna try a lifestyle where they don't have to have 2 cars, where they can live with 1 car or even no cars. And so the people that are gonna be occupying those office spaces or moving into those residential units don't want to have that. There's strategies that you put into the development. You unbundle the parking with the apartment, so you rent the parking separately from the apartment. Don't automatically give everybody 2 spaces or even 1 space. If they want it, they sign up for it. You provide other kinds of transit and so on. You don't have scooters here yet, but it'll change your life. Not sure for the better, but but anyway, but all kinds of other mechanisms to do that last mile travel. So you don't want to spend 1 extra penny on parking that you don't have to. And we would always be an advocate for you to find ways to cut that, either through parking districts or other kinds of cooperative efforts. And certainly there were lots of good recommendations in that parking study for better parking management than you have downtown.
And I think we would be remiss if we didn't add into the conversation about parking the impact of shared mobility trends and autonomous vehicles. And one of the pieces that you've asked us in the RFP to look at is doing benchmarking on global and national cities and ways that they are incorporating technology and shared mobility. So as part of our scope of work, we want to be looking at not just parking, but what the future is going to look like based on how some other cities have decided to move forward with that.
Yeah, but I think overall the goal is to reduce your parking needs, as is kind of the case. Hopefully for cities around the country, we're all trying. And the thing I think we hear from a lot of our clients, we were with a mutual client yesterday, Michael and I and Brian, and it's the Atlanta airport, right? And they're building tons of parking, and they know that in 20 years they're not going to need anywhere near the amount of parking that they're building. They're a little bit of a different animal, but we certainly, I would say, hope and expect parking requirements to decrease for a variety of reasons, the factors, a lot of which you outlined in your RFP. So.
Now, would also add that going forward, there needs to be a monitoring program to understand the adjustments to the parking demand and supply side. That'll be really critical given the autonomous vehicle evolution as it goes forward.
That's an overlay we could do. Is an overlay of the parking around each transit station.
Yeah,
What's
so-
there and what's available, what's public, what's private.
Right.
One of the layers that we actually have right now, and this is what I had popped up there while everyone was answering that question, all of the yellow parcels that you see, that's all the public parking that's currently available. So it's quite numerous. But you can see, as we zoom in, the proximity to each station. For example, Central Station here, this large public parking facility here. It's a helpful tool.
One of the questions that was asked was about the business impact of related growth around TOD. Go to the next slide. One of the things that we tried to do, there is clearly a symbiotic relationship between transit, business attraction, transit. The two work hand in hand. The challenge that we see in some cases, specifically in Jacksonville, is you have, for example, in these 6 stations that we've outlined here, which are right there kind of in the center of your urban core, you have a population of less than 2,000. And so you have a very low number of bodies within the market, and you have in the lines below it a situation where retail numbers show to all of the retail demand being met by existing retail. So when retailers and developers are looking at places to build new retail, place retail, they say, this area alone is not dense enough with a high enough demand to meet the presence of new businesses. Doesn't mean the region isn't, but this area, which is about 1 mile total. Each of those stations is a 1/4 mile apart. It's about roughly a mile total diameter. That means that they try to draw from further, and that's when you get people saying, you know, where's the grocery store in my neighborhood? Well, it's because when you take all the people, there's enough for technically 1 grocery store. Now, that doesn't mean it's that way in practice. It just means that's the way that when retailers are making economic decisions on where they develop and invest, that's how they make their first cut look, based purely upon head count, income, density, rooftops, existing businesses. So the challenge always for your team is how you defeat this slide, how you paint a different story, a different picture, to explain it in a way that's different that retailers and business attraction can understand, hence capital. Prince George's County, Maryland is a perfect example of this, one of the most affluent African-American counties in the country. They couldn't get anything of any real substance, and it was because they're right on the edge of DC. And every time they looked at the county, they pulled from Alexandria, they pulled from Washington, DC, and they said it's already being met because you can just drive 15 minutes that way and go to it. Well, if I live 25 minutes that way, I don't want to do that. So they had to, Jack Johnson went to ICSC and modified the way that he showed the story and sold the story, and then they, within the next 5 years, had 3 or 4 different new retail residential developments. Some of the sites you have are going to have the same story that needs to be told. Certain places they're going to get automatically. You're going to go to Brooklyn and you're going to say, I get it, I see it. San Marco, I see it. The medical center, I see it. But other places, you're going to have to defeat the picture and explain it in a way that when you're having that tough conversation, you can convince them to come to your side. This is a perfect example because you have 6 stations within 1 mile area that exist, or in some cases are planned going up, but the stations are there, and then you have to keep on track with your vision, not only work with the communities, but work with the retailers, the potential tenants, and do strategic things to reposition. I don't know if JLL, from a local standpoint, you have a great understanding of the businesses in the downtown core where a lot of these situations exist. Would you have anything to say as it relates to the retail and tenant acquisition requirements for those type of density?
Yep, so retail is starting to come around now that we're getting more and more residences downtown. So we've hit roughly with our pipeline, call it 5,000 units downtown. We'd like to get to 10,000. So we do need a little bit more higher density of residential downtown before we can fully support a lot of that retail going forward. From the business standpoint, it's pretty clear where our businesses are centered. However, that is expanding outside of the downtown core as well. We've got office buildings with surface parking west of the downtown core that borders the La Villa area that's attractive to a lot of businesses. It's adjacent to our new county courthouse. And so we are seeing the business community expand outside of the central core of downtown as well.
Right. If I could add, and the impact of what you're doing on your economic development strategy broadly is important too. You're communicating to the business attraction, retention, and growth markets the future of the city. And you are assisting them to make decisions now that they can see the vision, but they can't see the outputs yet. So for example, I'm in Atlanta, and I had the privilege of sitting on your side. Also, I ran a redevelopment authority while I was there. And one of the most important things that we could do is our MARTA controlled sites and land, but didn't control development incentives, which were crucial in bringing and attracting Fortune 500 companies to come to our core. So in addition to MARTA doing what it was doing and Invest Atlanta doing what it was doing, it was very important under city leadership that we work together to make a cohesive argument so that we had all of that strategy and vision woven into our economic development strategy. So it has broader impacts also, because the Fortune 500 that you're chasing now, particularly Jacks USA that you're chasing in your industry sectors, are looking for not only space, but they're looking for talent and what that talent wants. So it's extremely important that you communicate that vision and the impacts it will have on economic development generally.
I can tell you in Denver, when we built our transit system, the economic development people from the chamber track how many companies come and so on. They say 80% of the new companies that come to Denver locate within a half mile of a transit station, because they want workers and they want people, the young people want to live around transit. They want an alternative lifestyle, and they want those workers. So it has been a huge economic boom to our entire region, let alone the downtown core.
Yeah, I mean, following up on that, look, you're a very young city, right? I think you're the second youngest population city-wise in the state. Is that right?
Right.
And following up kind of what Ty said about Atlanta, I mean, MARTA, which 15, 20 years ago, people looked at and they were like, yeah, it's kind of an irrelevant engine through the city. Right now, literally in the past 4 years, you've had enormous companies locate where they are and spend literally hundreds of millions of dollars on development because they're on MARTA. State Farm, which is building a campus in Atlanta, built a new train platform so that that MARTA would literally go into their building. It was it was not a small endeavor. It wasn't a cheap endeavor. And anytime you get involved with the feds, it just takes forever. But they paid for it because they wanted it there. NCR, which just built an enormous, they partnered with a developer to build an enormous headquarters in Midtown, right by Georgia Tech. They did it partially because it's walking distance to, I think, 2 MARTA stations. So the transit piece of Fortune 500 and large companies locating and property value as the transit systems become more ingrained and become, let's just say, gain higher ridership. I mean, it is, there's an incredible correlation, and we are literally living it every day in Atlanta.
The problem is it doesn't come overnight.
Yes, that is true.
It takes longer. Real estate takes a long time, and jobs take a long time. So it's really important that you get the system up and going, because that's really what spurs it.
You asked us next to address traffic impacts related to TOD around stations. Obviously, I think our engineering friends are the best ones to handle that, but I will leave it to them.
So we know that the very nature of transit-oriented development with its compact, mixed-use nature, pedestrian-friendly nature, encourages fewer vehicle trips, particularly single-occupancy vehicle trips, and reduces VMT. We've seen that across the country with examples and lessons learned. And so with TOD, it results in reduced traffic congestion, and with that reduced traffic, you also have fewer crashes, and then that means fewer injuries. So TOD has been shown to reduce dependence on the automobile, and by allowing residents to live and play and work all in the same area. And critical to ensuring positive traffic outcomes is to include strategies that decrease SOV travel and encourage more transit use. So one of those things is the transit network itself, making sure that there are effective transit options to and from the transit-oriented development. We know that JTA has a good, solid network of transit options and is proposing, especially with the proposal of the U2C corridor, the BRT, First Coast Flyer corridors, the regular bus routes, the regional express bus routes, and so forth, and even some of the on-demand services with the Ready Ride and beachside buggies that you have. So having that good network of transit options, effective, very frequent, reliable, convenient transit options, and then combining that with the multimodal connections, making sure that the TOD environment is very pedestrian friendly, walkable, having walk corridors, bicycle corridors, a bicycle network. We talked about scooters, so all of those sort of multimodal options are very critical. And even other types of strategies to encourage transit use and less automobile, SOV, single occupancy vehicle automobile use, such as providing commuter benefits, employers providing commuter benefits, which are, employer tax fee transit vouchers, for example. And there's many different strategies that could just help ensure that those traffic impacts will result in a positive outcome.
Yep. So overall, obviously, TOD will reduce the amount of vehicle trips, and I think the real focus should be on complete streets, making sure there's connectivity to the transit stations for pedestrians, bicyclists, and also providing the ability for kind of last mile trips, whether it's ride sharing, car hailing. So those types of strategies would be important. Overall, would hate to see any increase in capacity improvements near the corridor that would just induce more trips. And so the strategy should be focused on making strong multimodal connections to the transit station areas.
So one real life example on how we've advised a transit agency, we worked for the Springfield Redevelopment Authority in Springfield, Massachusetts, and we advised them on the redevelopment of a historic head house. There was office on the upper floors, and then at ground floor level, it was combining intercity bus, local bus, Amtrak, and a commuter rail between Hartford, Connecticut, and Springfield. So that was the project. But what they faced was that the station itself was an island unto itself. The track level was elevated, much like y'all's, and to get from where the station was to other neighborhoods on the other side of the elevated tracks, you had to go through 2 tunnels, and they were poorly lit. There were bats living in them, and once you got to the other side, there were frankly not good streets. So from a pedestrian perspective, there was not good connectivity. So we worked with the Springfield Redevelopment Authority to do minor improvements, really, that had a very huge impact on pedestrian connectivity. So for example, lighting the tunnels, that was an easy win. We painted we advised that they paint murals to help facilitate the pedestrian connectivity. Putting in, and then for the retailers on the other side, providing them, if they came to us and said we are going to require $10,000 to refresh our facade, we would fund, the city of Springfield would fund 50% of that. So helping with a facade refresh in addition to installing street furniture and other street improvement measures. So I think that, in conjunction with everything that April and Ray have said, that those are the ways that we can create small wins for pedestrian connectivity.
That said, I would say anytime you're going to increase density, you're going to create more people coming and going. So there will be more traffic. These are great strategies and really successful strategies for mitigating that. But, I mean, get ready, because the minute you start having density come into areas that it didn't have before, people are going to start protesting. And that goes on in Vancouver, that goes on in Seattle, it goes on in Denver, cities that you think New York is trying to hold down their density, and it's always, always about traffic. Their fear of traffic. It isn't that it actually changes that much. They're just terrified of it. So you got to be prepared and have a strategy.
Okay, the next question that you had posed to us, of course, is, I think the recent development locally. But we understand that First Baptist is consolidating significantly. Obviously going from 9 blocks to 1 is going to have an impact on any city, period, and any sort of planning and TOD type project. Again, I think one of the things that makes us pretty unique is our national perspective and our local knowledge. So I did want to start on the local piece relative to this, just about the market and where we think the Baptist consolidation leads, or what the potentials are.
Yeah, to talk on that real quick, so I think that an outsider who wasn't too familiar with Jacksonville looking at this aerial would see that this is the northern terminus of the Skyway, and there are 3 large parking garages adjacent to it. And so there is probably some component of park and ride adjacent to that station that is city or local transportation authority owned, and that's obviously not the case. It's primarily an insular utilization right now for First Baptist for their services, for their school, for their administrative offices, and for their recreation. So provided that First Baptist does go forward with this consolidation and ultimately disposes of those 8 city blocks right there, it's unknown at this time what is ultimately going to be there. Some likely candidates would be multifamily, townhome condo, and retail. It's safe to say that anything that goes there is probably going to benefit from the public transport service line, much more so than that's utilized right now. So again, not knowing what the potential use is going to be, it's going to be developer contingent, but it's safe to say that probably at least 2 of those large parking garages would remain there for servicing whatever product will ultimately be there. If it's multifamily, if it's condo, there's going to need to be some density of parking there. And this kind of goes back to the public-private initiative that we were talking about before. Even though JTA does not own this land, they own a very significant piece just north of this land with the Rosa Parks Station. And so to get on the ground floor with not only First Baptist Church, but also prospective interested parties in this group, to find a way that it will be mutually beneficial between future developer and JTA is going to be extremely important. There are a lot of potential development uses of this site that's going to benefit JTA. If it is a mixed-use site and there's going to be multifamily, townhome, condo, there are going to be people that are going to the sports zone, the sports recreation area after hours. And so they're going to be living there. They'll take public transport so they can safely get there and get home without having to drive their car. From a retail standpoint, there will be people that are coming to this location. and riding public transport to get there, and then going back to wherever they came from. So again, it's safe to say whatever goes there will be to the benefit of the ridership for JTA, but getting, on the front end, making sure that JTA is in lockstep with the seller as well as any potential purchasers is extremely important.
If I could add, I get excited when I see something like this because many public sector entities tend to respond reactively. They say, well, I hope such and such buys this and turns it into this and it'll be helpful to me. But what I would posit to you and argue is that a proactive approach is the way to go, because when you think about it, I would imagine most of that property isn't even on the tax digest. So there's instant value day one through your TIF to make private development look the way you want it to look, that maximizes the ridership at that particular station. And when you do your station master plan and look on a micro level, that's the type of proactive thinking that really can get you creative. Now, you can't do it all by yourself, right? You got to work with DIA, you got to work with the city. There's a way to think about this collaboratively, but I do agree with you. Public-private partnership, if you're going out proactively marketing it to a way that you think will be beneficial to your goals, and you have tools to help you do that, that gets me real excited that you can control some of the outcomes and capture value for the things that you're trying to accomplish in other places.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's fair to say we see this as a real opportunity. Again, it's not without pain points. It's not without nerves in the beginning, but I mean, it's a almost the potential to rapidly urbanize an area and get it back on the tax digest that it hasn't been on for, I mean,
ever.
How many generations? We'll say ever. And just again, given the relative youth of the city, the idea that urbanization is the national trend, but also that candidly your downtown core has some natural competition, and let's just say the beach, where younger people may tend to live or at least have. You're going to potentially use as an opportunity to continue that hopefully flood of bringing bodies to downtown rather than just having them commute in from the beach on a daily basis. But again, when you look at your comparables, your example cities, every one of them, almost, a lot of them, let's just say, have things or attributes that would tend to potentially pull people outside of the urban core into different areas, whether it's mountains, whether it's beaches. They've got them. The point, though, is that the attributes of urban lifestyle and the potential of density are really bringing people back to cities. And at this point in time, you have the ability to compete a lot more with the natural attributes surrounding you to bring people back to the urban core. So we see this, again, it's not like a slam dunk opportunity, it's an opportunity. And as Ty said, this is something that should be exciting, not exactly scary.
It's one of the few places you have in all of the planned existing locations where you can really think big scale. You can have big impact, small stations, big stations alike. But this one, from the sheer size, there's an ability to think about it from a planning standpoint in a much bigger way. You don't have to do it all. You don't have to control it all, but you probably do need to participate in the visioning of it, certainly the connectivity to make sure that everybody benefits from that much development that will occur.
I'm the developer in the group. I'd like you to buy a block and make it a demonstration project. It is the right scale. You can work on it. You're going to plan it, and you'll sell it to vertical developers, but they're going to do what you want them to do. And then show this community what a great walkable TOD.
Marilee's going to show you what those numbers look like in a second.
Yes.
Right, exactly.
Amazing. Get the land. Get the land.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
Yeah.
Okay, so the last data request, I'll say, that you sent us was presenting a case study. We recall that in the pre-bid meeting, Denver was mentioned. And what's interesting about this team is several entities were involved in Denver. And I would say, Marilee is the most qualified to discuss Denver. JLL had a part, and we'll discuss that as well. And I want, Marilee is going to present her case study. The one thing I want you all to recognize before she even gets going is this all takes time. And the Denver case study is a perfect example of that. So.
Yeah. It takes a village and it takes time. I'm gonna push the button so I can go fast. You give me a 2-minute warning. Okay. We have 15 minutes. I'm gonna first talk about what the Platte Valley, Denver Platte Valley is our old rail yards. And this is, your classic picture of the rail yards. And in every city, the highway, the railroads, and the rivers are all in the valley, and they all run together. And so you can see that gray area, that brown area over there. And then there were viaducts crossing that to get people across all the rail yards. Denver's a transportation, intermodal kind of city, just like you are. So similarities. And so here are the viaducts in the old days, and our streetcar system, and God bless its soul, gone. But the viaducts, so we had to take the viaducts down over time. When the railroads went away, there was a mass sale of this land, became surplus from the railroads. And then my involvement was that I was the developer. I worked for the developer that bought this real estate. So we bought about 300 acres plus the Union Station property itself, which is a 19-acre. So this is a diagram that was done to show you the new road system to get people into that land once the viaducts were down. The first step we did was planning. I mean, and the details of this plan don't matter except that you can see there's a park and the neighborhoods. We were careful to shape the neighborhoods and so on. But we had to put down what is it that we want, what does everybody want, and we took that to zoning to get that zoned. And went through all those battles to get that done. We had to figure out the infrastructure financing and so on. Not that we did it all, but we got it done. This image is a great image that shows the land. First of all, you can see the park that we put in. You saw the drawing. We sold the land to the city. They built the park with a special district assistance. The red outline is then the private land that we had left over that we were selling to a vertical developer, which we did, and found a really good one. But the problem was that this was all dirt out there. There was nothing out there. So the transit line came in, and here you can see they've built this little train line, but there's nothing around it except dirt. There's another image. And the development was about 1,000 feet out across this huge dirt field that were the old rail yards. So we had to put in a pedestrian bridge, and this bridge had to go over what are freight train lines right now. They were smart. They didn't do your standard ugly pedestrian bridge. They made it into a landmark. The developer chipped in money, of course, and there was special, lots of financing stuff. Takes a village. This is another image then to show how that looked. And so you can kind of see the development going on in the foreground. That's what the private sector was building, all residential, across all that dirt. And then across in the back of the dirt, you can see the little Union Station building, and then the bridge on 16th Street. Look at the high-rise buildings. They're all in the distance. They're not even close, right? But this developer did a great job. They paid attention to materials. They put in densities, plazas. This was designed for a high-end market. And these were high-end condos. They were, in fact, the most expensive condos in the whole Denver region when they came in, despite their location. This is what the area kind of started growing into. The park, you can see, continued to mature. The development continued. We got some tall buildings in there. All along the park is still residential. That was very much by design. And then behind it, between the residential and Union Station, was a mix of commercial. We were lucky enough then to have the transit line come in. And this was our Fast Tracks initiative where the citizens voted a sales tax increase to try to build 7 corridors in 12 years. It didn't quite work out on budget and on time, but on the other hand, we have 7 corridors and it'll probably be 20 years or so. So that's a great deal. And it changed the world, and all those lines converged in this neighborhood at Union Station. So now we're back at our Union Station looking at it from the other side of the tracks in our historic district. And that had to be planned. How do you take all those lines and fit them into this old station that sat on 19 acres? And so the station planning had to happen, and that's really where JLL came in.
Yes, so as Mary Lee said, this is a multi-decade project. So Mary Lee started working on this with the city in 1990. In 2002, JLL was brought on board by the Colorado Department of Transportation and the city and the county, and most specifically by the Regional Transportation Authority. And so JLL was tasked with creating a diverse team of technical assistants to advise on the transit master plan for the 19 acres that you see there. And so in the course of an 18-month process, we engage with over 60 different community stakeholders. So very much like what we plan to do for the JTA, we've done in Denver. Getting the community feedback, working with Amtrak, working with Greyhound, working with all the transit users to understand how a master plan could satisfy all their requirements.
And let me just add, this was a great case of public-private partnerships. The FTA requires when you go through your EIS process that you talk about what does everybody want to see, what's the vision, and you don't talk about budget. So of course that was just the craziest thing on the planet. They came up with a plan that was about $400 million off. So that's when the public sector said, oh, we better bring in the private sector to help us plan this and solve it. Because the public sector thinks the private sector has money, the private sector thinks the public sector has money, right? So that's when you guys were brought in to solve it. And they had to separate the tracks, the commuter rail from the light rail, and do a whole different redesign, really complicated. In this diagram, you see the regional buses coming in underground, and then the tracks are above ground and so on. So here it is under construction. It was a big deal, massive to go, because it's a multi-scale thing. Here they are building the cover for the rail and the station. Here's the glamour shot, twilight, it looks gorgeous. What's important about this image is in the middle you see that big loop, you see the saddle, we call that white thing the saddle that covers the tracks. Remember, look on the right and all the development going on. This picture's old, it's now about 5 years old. But look at all the development. That was where that dirt was, where that was just 1,000 feet of dirt. But the development has come in. The left side is our historic district. It's our La Villa, if you want. It had capped heights and so on. But the development that it came when we were doing that transit system, it was so important.
You can think of this very similar to, not obviously quite the scale and complexity of some of the transportation, but the First Baptist opportunity. There's an opportunity to start with whatever the plan and vision is, and over time to work cooperatively in sequencing to take down, so that in this case it's only 20, I mean this is massive, but we're talking 20 years, but still, that much work in 20 years. Imagine if you do this step with First Baptist, what it will be in 20 years. You'll be showing these same slides and everybody will say, wow, it started with that vision, and piece by piece, it was layered on top with different private-public partnerships.
I'll wind up the story because this is what most people see when they come to Denver is, and then we had this ugly old train station, those are the original benches and so on. They'd taken out all the lighting, it was a mess, contaminated. But private sector came in, and this is now a full-time operating hotel for 24/7 activity. It's where Amtrak comes, it's where the station, but more importantly, it's the best restaurants in town. So a lot of food and beverage in here, and it's been a big success. And maybe the most important thing, I live 2 blocks from here, is it's a community amenity. This looks like Water World in the summer. There's farmers markets, it's programmed, there's entertainment at all the holidays. Union Station was designed to be now the living room for our community, and it is. So it's been a great success. I thought I'd share this slide with you because it, to me, tells the story. We bought the land, that surplus railroad land in 1991, and we allocated, this is from a real estate portfolio, we allocated it at $1.50 a foot in value. Then we went through that visioning plan. Where's the vision? Worked with the neighborhood, got it up to zoning. And then we sold a parcel to Elitch's, which is an amusement park kind of off to the side, for $2 a foot. And then we sold the land to the city for that park that you saw for $5 a foot. And then we got the zoning on the rest of the land, sold in '99, so this was 8 years later. We sold that big parcel to East West, which are the vertical developers that did the village that I showed you the pictures of. They turned around 90 days later and sold a big chunk to Archstone and Greystone for $50 a foot. So, oh, come on already, you know? We were selling a big parcel, they sold a smaller one, but still, pissed us off. Then in 2000, the next year, it goes for, a parcel goes for an office building for $150 a foot.
9 years.
Then,
Amazing.
9 years.
yeah. And then Fast Tracks and the Union Station redevelopment came in. Today, land out there is over $350 a foot. So the value add came from the planning, the infrastructure, and then the incremental growth. And it can happen everywhere. So I'm going to show you another project that's not the scale of that downtown, which I think is more applicable actually to some of your station areas. This is City Center Inglewood, which is a first-ring suburb, 7 miles south of downtown. It's a below median income neighborhood. It was a struggle, just a zip code suburb, no there. It was actually a regional mall built in the 60s. You can see that M-shaped funny thing. It was a big deal in its day. It was 1,300,000 square feet, 6,000 parking places. It was, but by the 90s, it was pretty bad, pretty bleak. And the city ended up buying it. It was empty. The city bought it back, contaminated. It was a mess. And they said, oh my God, what are we going to do? In Colorado, the cities are supported primarily by sales tax. So losing a regional mall was huge. For a small town, their annual budget was $30 million. You know, it was tiny. What are we going to do? So I came in as their development advisor and manager on this project. They had already done what most cities do wrong, and most public sector. They had this big chunk of ground. They didn't know what to do with it because they weren't developers. So they said, we'll ask the private sector. They did an RFP, got 12 responses. This is the best of the responses, and it's just a big box center covered with surface parking. They had no regard whatsoever to the transit or anything that was along this road. So we paid attention to the fact that they were going to open a station and said, we're going to open the first, and this in fact was the first TOD done in Denver. So this is a revised plan. And in this plan, so the transit comes in on the left side, that's a busy artery, and there's a transit station, and we designed everything there. We put in a street grid. Even if we weren't building buildings today, over time it could densify. So we created a plan that had enough critical mass to attract and become a destination, had a mix of uses, but it also had room to grow and have value capture so that there could be additional profit for the community over time. Here's a model of the plaza. The big building on the right was the only thing we could save. It's an old department store. We turned into a city hall and a civic building. Kind of a quick overview, 55 acres, it was 1 million feet. The city, I was working for the city, and we did the land development. We had to take down the buildings, do the site preparation, do the planning, and then we sold off parcels to the private sector. So their development was 150. Now this is 20 years old. This is really a look back. And it was very much a public-private partnership. The land uses were a lot of transit, the city hall with its library and a museum, office, retail, apartments, and then plazas and open space. Here's a picture of what it looks like today. So you can see there's freight lines as well as the rail line, but then there's the bridge that capitalizes on the transit, stepping you down into the village, and we made a main street. Lots of transportation. We were really fortunate. Not only was there a light rail, there's also a regional bus exchange transfer facility, and then we added lots of bike facilities and shuttle to the local employment district. Here's a vision of that. There's the buses underneath for the bus transfer. And then here's ART, which is the local shuttle. This has 15-minute headways. It goes a 1-mile loop and to the hospital district. It is actually the third highest performing shuttle transportation system, not a train, but shuttle, in the entire RTD system. It's funded by a combination of the city and the transit agency and the MPO. Here's the Civic Center, which is the old department store turned into City Hall, plus a library that's a lot cuter than that. A museum that does not only a museum inside but outside. They provide lots of high quality sculpture, which is that art theme. Here you can kind of see standing in front of the City Hall building, looking down the main street, looking at the residential on the right, which from day one was full. From day one, and it is sold 2 or 3 times, every time for a great profit. It stays at 99% occupancy. This is looking back. You're standing in front of about a half mile up, looking back down the main street, where we tried to make it walkable and so on. We do have a Walmart, and I've gotten beaten up a lot for how could you put a Walmart in a TOD? Well, guess what? City needed shopping, and we couldn't even get a Target, but we could get a Walmart for this neighborhood. So it's been a huge success. It's still there 20 years later, so that says a lot anyway, because Walmart usually moves. This land development deal is just to show you how the public-private partnership worked. The city put in about $15 million to do public improvements, but then we sold and leased off those other parcels. Miller Weingarten is a retail REIT, Walmart, Trammell Crow Residential, and then the transit agency, RTD, put in money because we gave them 910 parking places. So they chipped in money. So everybody chipped in a little, and we got the deal done. Lots of things we had to do. A lot of fancy footwork to do that. I would say number one was this small town didn't know how to do development, and they had a big job, so they were smart enough to hire somebody to help them. But you really do need that, someone who can talk the language with developers and be with them. I would say in terms of the other evolution that I would hire, that I would mention here, is this idea of building value over time and the value capture. And so planning the land so it's successful today, ready for transit, and but really increases in value over time. We made mistakes. We didn't understand the relationship between the retail and the residential developers. We tried to marry them in a couple projects, and that didn't work out as well. They sued each other. People weren't too happy with it, and so on. Every project has successes and warts, but overall, this one had great results. First, in terms of economic development, new jobs, new headquarters that came into that area, the apartments and the residential, it's been a huge success. And the city, the zip code city, finally had a restored identity. So that's 2 examples, but the principles are the same. Do the planning, bring in the private sector, know how to work with them, and then your ridership goes up.
That second one is a good piece to think about some of the opportunities, for example, in La Villa. Not the exact same uses and scale, but the processes, the thought process, very, very applicable to community engagement. Very, very simple.
With that, obviously, we'd love to take any of your questions. We've been talking to you for a while. Love to not do that.
Can you give us an example of community, historic in terms of, let's just say urban renewal came through, cut through the actual neighborhood itself. Community's been decimated, has not recovered, no real investment in it, none whatsoever. Whereby yet transportation in that particular city have been planned and has reached that particular community, yet they haven't seen a resurgence, none whatsoever. How have you worked in those particular communities, and what has been the transition since your involvement in those?
we'll give you a really good example. So in Atlanta, there's an area called the Auburn Avenue District. Historic Auburn Avenue, home of Martin Luther King, Ebenezer Church, one of the most valuable locations in the city of Atlanta, I'll even argue the United States, certainly African American community. Lots of historic architecture, lots of concerns and considerations for scale and design. They actually have 2 historic design organizations that just focus in on that area. And so it has struggled for years, even though its proximity to the core of downtown, the CBD, and Georgia State University, right off the interstate. It struggled for years to see itself revitalized, and there are a number of reasons, no different than any other city: perceived crime, perceived depressed economic values, those types of things. Well, the city had an idea to really anchor its new transit trolley car system through the Auburn Avenue corridor. It literally, of all of its routes, 2/3 of them are going up one side of Auburn Avenue District and down the other side. It is, without question, the most significant portion of the entire trolley car loop, streetcar loop. The challenge they've had, though, is Atlanta itself, as a regional city, has lots of cars, lots of people come in, and once they get into the city, you can't take the streetcar, obviously, to the city, but once they get to the city in their cars, typically, they either stay put in their place or they walk, 100, 200 feet to the left or right, and that's the extent of their movement during the day. Occasionally, somebody would get in a car and go to another part of the city during the day before going home. Now that's been really hindered by Ubers and other things, right? So it has not really worked to not just on Auburn Avenue, but in general, it has not really worked the way that they would want. We can't be the solvers of the streetcar issue. MARTA can't solve the streetcar issue because it's a cultural perception thing that time itself is going to kind of knock down. But what we have been able to do is, and Ty, probably more so than anybody in the city, has led a number of clients to find creative ways to finance projects, because ultimately what's kept development down is that if you can't get but $15 a foot in rent, there's nothing you can build more than one story that can be built and paid for with the rent that you receive. You just can't do it. And it can't be of so much quality because you can't take in more than $15. It's not like Buckhead where you can get $48 a foot in rent. So there have to be ways to help with that. The other thing is you have to really begin to figure out your marketing strategy and your stories to sell the character of the community, to dispel the inaccurate perceptions and feelings about a community, and really find, and even with that, find the people who are sensitive to listening to the story, who are either financial resources or developers. Because even with the explanations, not all developers and not all lenders could care. So you have to go find those ones who do care and will listen. And you put all that together. We did it, for example, Butler Street YMCA. We did it and we explained to them, the only way that you can kind of end your dilemma, your cycle of distressed assets is you need a national name, well capitalized, to come and make a statement for the market. So we found them Live Nation to put a new Live Nation ballroom there. World-class credit, strong tenant, operate facilities all over the world. And it fit the city's desire to see that part of Auburn Avenue become an entertainment district again. So that's but you have to go get them. They don't just come to you. And then when you do go get them, they have to listen to you and say, you know what? We heard differently, but we get it. We'll get on the plane and we'll come take a look. And then when they come take a look, you have to have the people there to sell them on the idea, and you have to get one. And then the one gets another one, and before you know it, it begins to change.
If I could, because that story isn't over. we're still working.
That's right.
On the improvement story, but I feel somewhat responsible to help get the $42 million Tiger II grant to help fund this $100 million loop that was built for conventioneers primarily to move them through downtown. Kind of a 1 mile circulator. It wasn't meant to, it was a streetcar. No rubber on road, I mean, fixed tracks, fixed rail. Hurt some businesses during construction, which is some of the negative side of this. And the city put together a mitigation program to help some of those smaller businesses. But one of the key tricks, and we just had a meeting yesterday on this, that the TIF that I managed, I'm now on the private side, is about to go through another round of funding. And we do it similar here. We actually take larger districts and bond against the increment in the entire district. So not just pay as you go, but it's a source of cash up front for private developers, which has value, right? So on the other side, I'm also a trustee of Ebenezer Baptist Church, which will never sell land ever. So I envy this situation. Ebenezer's part of the problem, right? There are 4 major stakeholders on Auburn Avenue: Butler Street YMCA, you got Ebenezer Baptist, Old Wheat Baptist. I mean, these are large institutional mission-oriented folks that real estate is the last thing on their mind. It's been paid for over and over, generations ago. So really the way that you change the character of Auburn Avenue is to not just tell private developers, come look, but get these stakeholders together in a room. And I think for the first time in 15 years, yesterday morning at 8:30, we were all there at that meeting before our flight. I, on behalf of my church, Michael and I on behalf of our client, Butler Street YMCA, and we're finally starting to see collaboration. So instead of all the churches saying, we all need parking, we're all gonna build structured parking, no, let's sit down and talk about how we map this out. And you know, Black Baptist churches in Atlanta don't share information very well. So I think that this is about to end, and we have money in the TIF district to finance private development up and down the corridor. Also, none of that is on the tax rolls also. So it's another value capture play that I think will change.
But to echo, that statement, the story is not over, right? I mean, it is, I'll tell you, when the streetcar was built, there were some challenges. Wasn't the most efficient mechanism.
You've been kind.
It was, yes, I'm trying to be diplomatic. It was expensive. It got a lot of bad press. And I'll tell you that the proper system, I think, took it over. But B, because the city, right, initially was running it, and then MARTA took it over. The story's not done, because in 15 years, when that services the new development around it and the area continues to improve, the post-mortem will be a lot more favorable than it is, than it was at the time. But it's also a pretty good example of where, granted, it wasn't an easy thing to do, but they took a risk. The city took a risk, and it will not pay off immediately, and I think they knew it.
And it's gonna change. It's in between our Beltline, downtown, natural real estate forces are gonna change it, but what the corridor wants, quite like La Villa in the neighborhood, how do we want it to change? Does this respect the history that we want in our community, and let's be proactive in trying to preserve what we want it to look like and what it will be. So it is not over. That story is still going.
Exactly.
Please.
Well, you go ahead if you got it. You're on a roll.
Yeah, so you talked about risk. And so I'll talk about my colleague who's the CEO of JTA. So from a risk aspect, if you looked at the spine of various different route opportunities for stops along JTA's Skyway to autonomous vehicle path, there would be a number of different stops. There will be the clamoring for development here versus development here, etc. That always brings political risk, not as well as financial risk. So you've talked about La Villa, great job. You've talked about Rosa Parks, which is the Baptist, First Baptist, properties around there. is First Baptist and Rosa Parks ready for development? Or are some of the other areas along those stops, those proposed stops, much more ripe for opportunities? C, are some of them too close, as you talked about, that could cannibalize each other? Because you got a great graph, great diagram that talked about 6 within 1 mile. That's going to be problematic. So, because those are real, I'm trying to help my colleagues manage their CEO's expectations, because trust me, I get them too from him. So, but it's those type of questions that I think that if someone is in this role, will have to advise them, because there's always pressure when, and I've said in that hot seat, of how to have to deliver on what you have proposed that you're going to do.
I think your responsibility is to do the stationary planning and, in concert with DIA and the city. That is for everybody. Every station and every community deserves that, and I think it's important for JTA to take a leadership role and make sure that every community and every station is addressed in that. Where the development comes is going to depend on, one, what land you control, because how much can you do if you don't own the land around it, and what incentives the city put up and stuff, but also the market demand. I would suggest you want to get some relatively quick wins. You've got to follow the market. In Denver, when they opened this light rail system, there's about 90 stations, and everybody was concerned that, they're all going to be competing with each other all the time. I don't know how we're going to manage it. I said, don't worry. The private sector manages that. It's the market. The market will tell you where it wants to go, and if you've got a plan in place for each of those, then you can play your role in supporting that. In a few places where you do own land, even there you're going to be driven by the market, because you're not going to be building buildings. The private sector is going to be doing that. But you're going to be the master developer with the vision and making sure the right thing happens. So I think you're right to be really sensitive about the community perception and politics and so on. And I think the first important step is to get those visions in place, so everybody knows that they're cared for and they have their opportunity, and then the market will come.
We talked about the sensitivity of, if you have 21 spots on a map, you can't have as your first thing a discussion about how I've prioritized these 5 over these 16. You've got to respect the fact that those spots all exist for some reason. Existing development, community will, natural transit progression. Something has caused it. So I think that you kind of take a deep breath, you look at the market, you understand where development is already occurring, you understand where ridership wants to go, where they want to actually come off a train as a destination. You figure out all those things and you have a conversation with the community, you gather their feedback on how they see their communities, how they see their desire for different amenities. Lots of times which are going to be really heavily geared around retail. In most places, when people say they want development, the thing that they always included, they can say this plus retail, office plus retail, housing plus retail. Nobody ever leaves retail out. I've never heard of it one time. So they're all going to have some similar things. The problem is you can't have 6 Starbucks in 1 mile, right? Not in Jacksonville. Maybe not in Atlanta.
New York City.
Maybe New York, maybe LA or Chicago. So, but that's not how you start a conversation with people, right? You have to get to that point when you're armed with the data and the feedback, because amazing thing happens when you get a group of people together and you explain to them that Starbucks said they can put 1 of these in the market and this is where they want to go, but we can get you this here and we can get this here. The ability to have that conversation without having people go to war with each other, because they do get it. Intrinsically, they understand that, well, I do understand why we can't have so many. You have a great vision, and I think you have to test it and trust it for a while and go out and get much more feedback, all those community engagements that are spec'd in here. I think you're going to get a lot of quick feedback Then you have to take it to the market, because in the end of the day, we can talk amongst ourselves, the community talk amongst themselves, but the market's going to tell you what you're actually going to get done and not done, and at what price. There are some quick wins, but that's when you begin to say, look, these two we think are really ready to go, because the market's already begging for it.
Right, and look, I think the question, taking them in order, Andre, is Baptist right? It's a lot. It's a really big honking piece of dirt.
It's right for planning.
Right, and that's the Englewood example is like a perfect, maybe not a perfect, but it's a pretty good analogy for that, right? It takes time, and it probably takes some vision, but the ability to control something that large, control is huge, and there's definitely a risk associated with it, no doubt. But the ability to plan and control something that large that can shape the fabric of the transit system and of the area for a generation, that's huge. So it may not be, put it this way, it may not be, the ripest banana in your system, but it's something that will ripen, and the ability to control it is really, it's a significant potential. Other stations more ripe, as I said, maybe. Obviously, again, you're working around some right now. There's an ability that clearly we think that some may be more ripe than others. But, station planning, all of them, casting a wide net in that regard with the understanding the market will come to you, that's important. And, in terms of stations cannibalizing, yeah, it's a potential for sure, but there's also an opportunity there. Because your stations are as close as they are, the momentum, as much as we worry about them cannibalizing each other, the momentum could clearly also swing the other way and carry it to the other stations because of their proximity. So it's a double-edged sword. But there is that potential as well, and I don't think that's a rose-colored glasses view of it. It's just a realistic, I think, idea of, or understanding of, hey, your stations, some of them are pretty close. But if you get rolling, your momentum is going to carry forward, and you're not really, I don't think, in danger of cannibalizing other stations.
One thing I'll add to that too is the good thing is you have infrastructure that goes directly to the First Baptist parcel. When looking at the extension of the U2C corridor, do we take it to 5 Points, service the retail? Do we take it through San Marco to service the new multifamily residential that's going up there? The infrastructure is there. And ultimately, it would take the capital required to convert that from the light rail to the AV. But as far as what happens with that development, we have infrastructure that goes directly right there to that First Baptist parcel that's going to be up for development.
Yeah, I can do one. So a lot of the stuff is centered around kind of stakeholders being engaged and the public being engaged, and Jacksonville, as we face, is very car-centric, and when we initially went out, we've been proposing TOD for a long time, and there's always been some resistance to the density and what that would bring. So what kind of engagement tools or strategies do you guys have that would then help maybe not sway it or drive it, but just accelerate it, or build that support for transit and TOD?
But people really, transit is just a utility. It's just like water. You should be able to turn on the spigot and it should work. And there should be transit there, and you should be able to take it for granted. What it's really there to do is build a better community. So I like to talk about the amenity value of what does your neighborhood have? What does it need? Where are the gaps? Part of that's going to be in the accessibility, and that's where transit fits in. Maybe they need childcare. Maybe they need a school. Maybe they need a workout facility. I think, for any kind of development, you want to talk about what the value is that you're bringing to that neighborhood. People live in their neighborhoods, or they work in their communities. Everybody wants to be part of a community and a village kind of feel. So I think you build when you're talking about this, you really are talking about neighborhood building and community building. And then to get that, transit's part of it. And to do it, we have to design it this way. We have these needs if we're going to serve you properly. And so it becomes part of that bigger conversation. I think transit is basically wonky, it's technical, it's not easy to talk to neighborhoods about in a way that they understand or that they buy into. So I think, you need to frame yourself as part of making a better community for everybody and then talk about it that way.
Yeah, I think clearly a lot of people, they have the wrong impression, and they think the conversation is almost as if you're asking them their approval or support to have transit and transit development. And because they don't quite understand how it impacts them, they have a perception. They feel that their response can answer you by saying essentially, no, we don't want it. There's tons of examples in our region where transit remains elusive to the communities that want it, because they enter into the conversations as if we're asking you, should we extend this line out here? And obviously half the room says no and half the room says yes, and a little bit more on the no side so it doesn't come. The challenge is that you have to believe that the half the room that's saying no, that half of that room does not quite understand what it means for them. And so I think part of what we can do to make it feel better for those people who are sitting on the fence and it's easier to say no is explain to them and give them very clear examples of how transit has improved quality of life, commute times, the ability to go right over to 5 Points for lunch, within 15 minutes, because I can do that once a week now because there's transit. I think you just have to show them, you have to sell them, and then ultimately you have to understand that it's not going to be 99% of the city all embrace this idea. It is what it is, and then you just have to ensure that the first ones you get out the gate, you hit your marks. They feel good, they look good, they offer the things that you've been selling the community on. But really in the beginning, I think we're not asking you as much as we're telling you, this transit is coming, how would you like to participate in its planning? Not if enough people in this room push us away, we're going to back off and not do it. It needs to happen.
And Zan, I would say that another thing that helps a lot in community meetings is just some of the visualization tools, because a lot of times when you talk about densities and how many square feet, it's hard for people to really envision what that means and compare different development scenarios. How is it going to look at this station? So just using some of the visualization tools that we have, as an engineering and planning firm. We have an art director that's very good at doing those before and after scenarios. And I think that a lot of times helps in community meetings, showing them something that they can understand, this is what it might look like.
That is so key, and also I've convened a lot of groups, and I can tell you there's a handful of people that tend to dominate some of these discussions, right? And in Atlanta, we have a unique system that there are 26 neighborhood planning units that you can't do anything on rezoning unless they participate. So you actually, it's not just community engagement, it's community partnership, right? And I think one, in a city like Atlanta, and I'm not gonna fake you out, we're cars, we like to drive.
Yes.
People, you say density, people will think different things, and a lot of communities will tell you what they don't want. But I would flip that conversation and show them what increased density and value capture does to give them what they do want. So when we talk about retail amenities that don't exist because there's not enough rooftops, not enough household incomes, if you can demonstrate that some of those uses come because of densification, and then show them it's not that bad, and this is the impact on you, and it's different in every neighborhood, you get a lot farther with the leaders in some of the community groups in my city, and then they help you deliver that message to the community. So it's a way you get leverage in your community partnership piece. And engagement to me means you went in and made a presentation. I really like to think about it, this is what we're going to do together, and we're going to walk hand in hand. There are going to be some good things, there are going to be some growing pains, but these are the outcomes that we all want, and this is how we're going to get there collectively.
When that switch flips from, what are you talking about, to we really would like what they have over there, it's amazing what happens.
Yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah.
It's amazing.
Absolutely.
I'm just going to make just a statement, just listening to the whole visualization thing. I think one of the main issues that we have in Jacksonville is, we're heavily transit dependent. So we have people that are going to ride. What the problem is that the people like us that are choice riders, they can't even imagine what it is to ride the bus in Jacksonville. And so that is our challenge, is to have them even, considering going to our JRTC and getting on the bus. That is the first step, is just to get them to that point, because we have a captive audience, right? But we want the other folks that are living in, Springfield and other places to even envision, oh, that is an option for me, and so, that's just a challenge. And so I'm just listening, and I think the whole visualization and making sure that they can see it, because right now I don't even think they can see it. So
in Washington, D.C., they did something very creative. With all development, there are zoning requirements for a certain level of parking density that must be met. And you can get variances from it if you are certain proximity to, I was about to say MARTA, but Metro. The metros in DC. But what some developers started doing, which was very interesting, it was started actually by Uber, is they started issuing credits to landlords to build less parking density in return for discounts for Metro or Uber rides, Uber shares, Uber purchases. And so if you can start people by just taking that 10, 15-minute lunch drive or to that next meeting, so rather than go in my car to go to a meeting 20 minutes away and parking in another garage, I can get that office worker to go take public transportation to that. It's kind of incremental steps. That's a long way of saying the way they got out of the box is to try to be creative in incentivizing developers to share in the cost to subsidize public transportation or Uber. There might be ways that you can do similar things here. Again, just starting small with developers and convincing someone who comes from the suburbs to drive into their office in Jacksonville, which takes them, say, 30 minutes every day, but that's the first person who's going to elect to take the bus. That's probably not going to happen. But if you can get when they came to work a few times with their car, get that 15-minute bus ride to, Brooklyn from downtown, then they'll say, the traffic's starting to kill me. Maybe I need to try the bus one day or try the park and ride location. And it's worked in Atlanta. I mean, I office on the Fringe, so it's not as far from me, but my brother-in-law works downtown, and he takes it to a park and ride, parks for $5, and rides in every day MARTA to work, and it costs him now $60 a month instead of $100 a month, and he loves it. But he had to be convinced, and it just took him a little time.
Any other questions? No? All right. Thank you.
John, thank you very much. Do you have a desire